"You are not worth choosing," said Mr. Julian Furrers in the cardroom doorway, loudly enough for the nearest four couples to hear. "Let us be honest with one another at last. £2,000 was one thing. Nothing at all is quite another, and no man of sense marries a curate's daughter for her handwriting." The Duke of Everleigh, standing 11 feet away with a glass of ratafia he did not want, watched the young woman in the white muslin gown receive that in the middle of his own ballroom, in front of his own guests. On the first night, he had opened Everleigh Hall in 4 years. She did not faint. She did not answer at once either. She stood with her hands loose at her sides and let the sentence go all the way through her, and then she said, very evenly, "Then I release you, Mr. Furrers, before witnesses. Nobody shall be able to say you were held. Honora, you will want to go and stand by Miss Stainforth," she said. "She is by the second pillar, and she has been watching you for a quarter of an hour, and if you leave her much longer she may begin to think." Furrers went scarlet and went. The four couples turned away with the particular busy grace of people who intend to repeat every word before midnight. And Miss Honora Thirkell stood alone in the doorway of the cardroom in a made-over muslin gown with a border her own needle had put on, and looked, for 2 seconds, as though she might be about to be ill. Ambrose Everleigh set down the ratafia. He had opened the hall that night because his aunt had told him that a duke of 41 who never entertained becomes a legend, and then a joke, and because she had been right. He had intended to be seen for 2 hours, to open the ball with some suitable woman chosen by his aunt, and to be in his library by midnight. He knew Miss Thirkell's name. She did not know that he knew it. 6 weeks earlier, at a public breakfast at Lady Cray's, he had been standing on the far side of an oleander in a tub invisible, unforgivably, when a knot of guests began upon the subject of the Duke of Everleigh, that he had shut up the hall out of temper, that he had quarreled with his brother and driven him abroad, that there was some ugly business about the brother's death at sea, and that Everleigh had never worn mourning for him. And a young woman's voice had said, "I do not know whether any of that is true, and neither does anybody here, which is what troubles me. Somebody's brother is dead. If it were mine, I should want the whole county to be quiet about it and let me alone." Somebody had asked her, rather nastily, whether she was acquainted with the Duke. "Not in the least," she had said, "but I am acquainted with grief, and it is not a thing to have handed round with the cold ham." He had stood behind an oleander and not breathed. Now the musicians were tuning for the first set, and his aunt was crossing the floor toward him with a Miss Havisham Grey in tow, and the whole room was arranging itself to watch the Duke of Everleigh choose. He walked past his aunt. He walked the length of his own ballroom under the eyes of 240 people, past the second pillar, where Mr. Julian Furrers was in the act of bowing over an heiress's hand, and he stopped in front of the cardroom doorway and bowed. "Miss Thirkell, will you do me the honor of opening the ball with me?" She looked up at him with the shock still on her, and he saw her think, with visible speed, about pity, and it was the first thing in 6 weeks that had frightened him. "Your Grace," she said, "if this is charity, I shall have to refuse it, and then we shall both look extremely foolish." "It is not charity. It looks remarkably like it from where I am standing." "Then let me give you a fact instead," he said low. 6 weeks ago, at Lady Cray's breakfast, you told a party of 11 people that grief is not a thing to be handed round with the cold ham. I was behind the oleander. I have wanted to thank you since the 12th of May and could not think of a way that would not embarrass you." He held out his hand. "This is not the way either, but the music has begun, and I find I do not care." Honora Thirkell put her hand in his. Afterwards he could recall almost nothing of that first set except the noise the room made when they took the floor, and the fact that her hand was cold, and that she said, at the second turn, without any preamble at all, "I had £2,000 from my godmother. It was in a bank at Marlbury that stopped payment in April. It was not a lie, and I did not know until 3 weeks ago, and I have not slept properly since. I am telling you now, at once, because it is what everybody in this room will be saying by morning, and I would rather you had it from me. Miss Thurkel, and I am not a curate's daughter. I am a curate's orphan, which is worse. I live with my uncle Sir Peter Cray, and I write his letters for him, and that is what Mr. Ferrers meant about my handwriting." Her chin was up. "There, you have the whole of it. You may put me back in the doorway at the end of the set, and no one will blame you." He did not put her back in the doorway. He led her to supper, in front of the entire county, and sat her at his right hand. And halfway through it, when the noise was at its height, and Mr. Ferrers had contrived twice to be looked at, Ambrose Everleigh rose with a glass in his hand. "I shall not make a speech," he said, and the room went obligingly quiet. "I shall make one remark. It was said in my house tonight within my hearing that a certain lady was not worth choosing, on the grounds that a bank at Marlbury stopped payment in April. He let that sit for exactly as long as it needed. I have this evening asked my solicitors to look into the affairs of that bank, since a good many families in this county are the poorer for it, and somebody ought to. And I will tell you what I have learned already at no cost whatever, that a man who measures a woman in April at £2,000 and in June at nothing has not changed his opinion of her at all. He has merely published his method." He inclined his head. "I give you the health of my guests, every one of them." The room drank. Mr. Julian Ferrers drank too, because there was nothing else to do, and Miss Camilla Stainforth was observed to look at him for a long, thoughtful moment over the rim of her glass. And she went home to her mother in the north within the fortnight, and her engagement was never announced. At the door at 2 in the morning, Honora Thurkel said, "That was magnificent, and you should not have done it." "Should not? You have made me the most talked-of woman in the county for something that was done to me." She was very tired and quite steady. "I am obliged to you, your grace, more than I can say. But I have been picked up off a floor tonight in front of 200 people, and I will not be a lesson taught to Mr. Ferrers. I would rather have been nothing at all than be that." He stood in his own doorway, with the lamps being put out behind him, and understood that he had been given the plainest instruction of his life. "Then may I call on you," he said, "by daylight, at your uncle's house tomorrow in the ordinary way, where there is nobody to see it and nothing to prove?" For the first time that night, Honora Thurkel smiled. "Yes," she said, "by daylight." He called on the Wednesday, and the Friday, and the Wednesday after that. And by the end of July, the Duke of Everleigh's greys were so familiar in the lane at Cray Hollow that the blacksmith's dog no longer troubled to bark at them. Sir Peter Cray, who was gouty and good-natured, and had never in his life understood anything before it was explained to him twice, received the Duke in the morning-room and talked to him about turnips for 11 visits together, and only on the 12th said, "You are not coming here for the turnips, are you?" in a tone of mild discovery. "No, Sir Peter." Ah, a long pause. "Well, she writes all my letters, you know. I shall be sunk." What they actually did on those Wednesdays and Fridays was walk. She showed him the parish, the ruined tithe barn, the ford, the 6 cottages at Hollow End with the damp coming through, the lane where the carrier's cart got stuck every winter. He had owned 400 acres of it for 19 years and had seen almost none of it, having been either in London or abroad or shut in a library at Everleigh with the shutters closed. "You do not ask me about my brother," he said, on the 4th walk. No, everyone asks, or they do not ask, and then they look at me as though I might do it at any moment. Your Grace, I have no curiosity whatever about how your brother died. She stopped at the stile and turned round. I have a great deal of curiosity about him. That is a different thing entirely. Nobody has said his name to you in 4 years, I expect, except lawyers. Ambrose Everleigh stood in a hayfield in the July sun, and found that he could not speak for a moment. Gervase, he said. He was 9 years younger. He was the charming one and I was the useful one, and we quarrelled in the March of 12, because I refused to pay a gaming debt of £1,100, and he took a passage out on the autumn packet in a temper, and the ship went down off the bar with all hands. He looked at the hedge. I have never been able to decide whether the last thing I said to him was unforgivable or merely correct. I have had 4 years and I still cannot decide. It can be both, said Honora. That is generally the trouble with families. He laughed a wretched, cracked, grateful sound, and then he found he was telling her the rest of it, all of it, standing at a stile with the hay flies going up in the heat. The letter he had written and never sent. The £1,100 still lying in a separate account at his bank, because he could not bring himself to use it. The shutters. Open the shutters, she said. Not for me. Not for the county. For him. He was the charming one and you have made his house into a mausoleum, and if he can see it, he must be extremely irritated. The shutters at Everleigh Hall came off in the first week of August, all 109 windows of them, and the head housemaid gave notice out of sheer nervous exhaustion, and was persuaded back with a rise of £4. He asked her in the September, in the lane at Cray Hollow, in the rain, with nobody present but a cart horse. I have thought a great deal about how to do this, he said. You told me in June that you would not be a lesson taught to another man, so there is nobody here. There is no ballroom and no supper table and no 200 people, and if you refuse me not a soul will ever know but you and me and that horse. Honora stood in the wet lane in a cloak he had come to know, as well as his own hands. I have no fortune at all, she said. The bank paid 1 3d in the pound in July. My whole estate is £11 a year, a writing desk and my father's books. I know it. I have known it since a fortnight after the ball, because you sent me the figures on a half-sheet, unasked, like a woman settling an account. His voice was unsteady, and he let it be. Miss Thirkell Honora, I have 400 acres in this parish, and a wife's whole business is generally supposed to be arranging flowers in the drawing-room of it. I do not want that. I want the woman who walked me round 6 damp cottages and told me the carrier's cart sticks at the ford every January. Marry me, and be the reason this estate is better in 30 years than it is today, and be the one person in England who says my brother's name at dinner. He drew breath. I have wanted to ask you since a hayfield in July. I have waited until now because you told me to come by daylight, and because I wanted to be able to say, truthfully, that I chose you when there was nobody watching at all. The rain came off the hedge in a rush, and the cart horse shifted its feet. Yes, said Honora Thirkell. Oh yes, and your Grace, if you please, one thing more. Anything. Mend the ford. They were married in the November in the small church at Cray Hollow, not at Everleigh, because it was her father's church and her parents lay in the yard of it. Sir Peter gave her away and wept into a handkerchief the size of a napkin, and afterwards complained loudly to everyone that he should now have to write his own letters, which he never once did, since his niece continued to do it for him for 19 years. The ford was mended in the spring. The 6 cottages at Hollow End were re-roofed, and the tithe barn came down, and its stone went into a village reading room, with a subscription library in it that the Duchess of Everleigh founded out of her own pin money, and ran with her own hands and her own ledger for the rest of her life. It was open 3 days a week to anybody in the parish who could sign a name, and by 1840 it had 1,100 volumes and a stove. Mr. Julian Furrers married, eventually, a woman with a modest independence and a formidable mother, and lived in a small way not 11 miles off, and was obliged for 40 years to hear the Duchess of Everleigh described as the most useful woman in the county. He was invited to nothing. Nobody at Everleigh ever cut him or spoke ill of him. They simply had no occasion to mention him, which he found, by all accounts, a great deal harder to bear. And every year on the anniversary of the ball, the Duke of Everleigh opened the hall, all 109 windows unshuttered, the whole house blazing. And every year he stood with his wife at the head of the room while the musicians tuned. And every year, before he let her out, he said the same thing to her, quietly, where no one else could hear. They said you were not worth choosing. I have spent every year since being grateful that they were wrong, and that they said it loud enough for me to hear it.